What's up guys, Darren Tang here, and today I'm going to show you how to lay out a bowling ball. But just a disclaimer, this is how I personally lay out bowling balls. There's a lot of different ways to do it, so for all you haters in the comments section that are going to tell me that I'm doing it wrong, you can go fuck. Alright, so I have two different kinds of bowling balls here. One's symmetric and one's asymmetric. They both have pins which represent the top of the bowling ball, the top of the core. CG, which is the center of gravity, pretty self-explanatory. But the asymmetric bowling ball has what we call the PSA, positive spin axis, or mass bias. In symmetric balls, they're the same all the way around. They have an x-axis and a y-axis. But the asymmetric balls, they have a z-axis, and that's what makes them asymmetric. All right, so one of the most important things when laying out a bowling ball is knowing your PAP. It stands for positive axis point, and it's the point on the ball that's the ball spins around at your release. So if mine is 4 3/4 over and 1.5 up. And where you're gonna find your PAP, best place to go is your local pro shop. Ask them about it. It's a very valuable number they need to lay out bowling balls for you. So I get a lot of questions about layouts. What layouts do I use? What layout should I use on this ball? And it's a really hard question to ask because no two people throw the ball the exact same. It's purely dependent on how the ball comes off your hand. It's almost like a personality. No two are exactly the same. So if you're trying to use a layout that's the same as somebody else's, it's not going to yield the same results for you. So to put it simply, the number one determining factor in how a ball visually reacts is how you throw it. So I'm going to lay out a ball for you, and the tools you're going to need is a quarter scale and a wax pencil. Now the first step, you got to draw a line from the pin through the CG so that you can find your mass bias. And that's going to be 6 3/4 from the pin through the CG, and that's where your mass bias or PSA is. So now that we got that done, I'm gonna explain to you the system that I use. I use the Storm Vector Layout System, and that is comprised of 3 different numbers that I'm gonna walk you through as I'm laying this ball out. All right, so here we got our first number. It's gonna be our PAP distance from the pin. That's gonna be 4.5 for me. I'm gonna be using a 4.5 by 4 by 2 layout, so that's our first arc. So the first 2 numbers are gonna be arcs. We're gonna come all the way down to the mass bias here, and that's gonna be 4 inches. You see that creates an intersection point right there. And the third numbers are pin buffer, which we're gonna explain later in the video. And that number is going to be 2.5. Now from there, we're gonna draw a line through the intersection point from the PAP, or the pin to PAP distance and the mass bias distance, tangent to the pin buffer line. Now, this is going to be your vertical axis line, also known as the VAL. Now the intersection point is going to be your PAP. So you have to kind of reverse engineer it now. So I'm 4 3/4 over and 1.5 up. So I need to go back 1.5 down, and then 4 3/4 across. And this is going to be our center line. And right there, the fingers are going to go up there, the thumb's going to go down here, and that's my standard pinup layout. Okay, so now we're going to lay out the asymmetric ball. Asym for short, so I don't have to keep saying asymmetric the entire video. But the biggest difference here is we have the mass bias here, and you see it's kicked out a little further. So if we were to draw a line through the CG again and mark it 6 3/4 from that point, it would actually be a little off. So that's the biggest difference here. And this is just another variable we can use to help manipulate ball motion. So with the VLS system, actually all systems, it should be the same way you lay out a bowling ball, whether it's symmetric or asymmetric. You still have the same numbers. From your pin to PAP, your VAL or mass bias to PAP, and then your pin buffer. So I'm gonna put a 5 by 4.5 by 4.5 layout on this one. And this is gonna give me a pin down layout. Now we're gonna do the same thing here. Vertical axis line, we have our PAP, this is our pin buffer. We're gonna draw our line 1.5 down, then 4 3/4 across again, because that is my PAP. Place our pin down. Center line and midspan, so that's your midspan, center line. Fingers are gonna go somewhere right here, and the thumb will go somewhere right here. All right, so to recap, here are the numbers again. The pin to PAP distance is from here to this intersection point right there. So this is our PAP. Then we have our mass bias to PAP distance here. That's this arc. And then the pin buffer right here, which we still have to explain. We'll get to in a moment. That's this distance, and that's 4.5 inches. So that's my 5 by 4.5 by 4.5. So you might be thinking, why am I holding this roller? Well, first I gotta tell you, class is in session. So for all you bowling nerds out here, let's pay attention to the board. All right, so right here we have our graph of what pin to PAP versus pin to mass bias means. And it's more or less the same. So right here is our 3 3/8 point. And that tilts the core at 45 degrees. 3 3/8 is the pin distance to PAP. 3 3/8 could be the pin distance to mass bias. So when it's at 45 degrees, that's when the ball or the core wants to wobble the most. And that creates the most flare. Now, let's take it down a notch. If we go to 1 to 0 inches, that's when the ball is most stable. So instead of being at 45 degrees and wobbling a bunch trying to get stable, it's already stable, which makes the ball really smooth. Now, if we go the other way, we go 5+ inches, 6 3/4 is the maximum you want to go so you don't track over your fingers. That's making the ball or the core more tall. So now it's going to take longer for the ball to stabilize, and that's what pushes the ball down the lane. That's why longer pins go longer. So next we're going to talk about the third number in the VLS system, the pin buffer. So this is a number that I didn't understand for a very long time, and to be completely honest, these three numbers, the pin, mass bias, pin buffer, I don't even really understand too much, but given the information that I have, it's how fast the ball transitions. So right here we have a linear line, and it may or may not be a linear line. This is just to describe what it looks like from what I'm processing. When you put your pin on the VAL, and a lot of people have been asking about my really tall pin layouts, the pin's getting closer to that VAL vertical axis line. That's what this is, getting closer to 0, that 0-inch buffer. And that makes the ball transition super fast. Makes it hook really early, and it wants to stand up as soon as possible. So when you bring that number back down to the higher numbers, the longer buffers, your transition period is gonna be longer, your ball's gonna lope more or go longer before it starts to hook. So in conclusion, class, this line right here represents the amount of flare you're gonna see compared to how long your pin to PAP distance / pin to mass bias position is. And here we have our pin buffer length. We're going from 0 from the top all the way down to the bottom. How that compares to how your ball is gonna transition. All right, class, so that's how I lay out a bowling ball. And if you thought this was helpful, let us know in the comments. If you are still confused after watching this video, it is a very complicated topic. We just make it simple, put the holes where we want to put them. But if you do have more questions, you can visit me live at twitch.tv/vitamindtang, and make sure you're on the lookout for a future video coming soon on how to drill a bowling ball featuring these two balls. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.